One man built one of the largest private art fortunes on the planet. Paintings, sculptures, entire collections worth billions, spread across secret storage facilities most people will never see. His wife spent 21 years married to him. And when the marriage ended, she walked away with $2.5 billion in cash and assets. Then, on top of that, an additional $100 million every single year for 13 more years. Total cost of that divorce, $3.8 billion. Today, we're breaking down exactly how a divorce settlement reaches a number that large, and the surprisingly simple legal principle that made it possible. Because once you understand this one principle, you'll understand why the ultra-wealthy spend millions on prenups before they even get married. Here's what most people assume about massive divorce settlements. They assume a judge just looks at how rich someone is and decides what feels fair. That's not how it works. Divorce settlements, even ones worth billions, are governed by actual property law, and the specific rules depend heavily on which state or which country the divorce takes place in. The case we're covering today is the divorce of art dealer Alec Wildenstein and his wife Jocelyn, finalized in 1999 after 21 years of marriage. It remains one of the largest divorce settlements ever recorded, and it's a masterclass in exactly how marital property law works when one spouse has built an empire the other spouse helped make possible, even without ever holding a formal job title in the business. To understand how a settlement gets this large, you need to understand one foundational idea in family law: the difference between separate property and marital property. Separate property is generally anything one spouse owned before the marriage, or received individually as an inheritance or gift during the marriage. Marital property, broadly speaking, is anything built, earned, or acquired during the marriage itself, regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. This is the part that surprises people. In most jurisdictions, it doesn't matter if only one spouse's name was on the business, the bank accounts, or the art collection. If that wealth was built or grew substantially during the years the couple was married, family courts generally treat it as a shared asset, something built through the marriage as a partnership, even if only one partner was the public face of the business. In the Wildenstein case specifically, the marriage lasted over 2 decades, and Alec Wildenstein's art empire grew enormously during those years. That length of marriage matters legally. The longer a marriage lasts, the more of a couple's total wealth was typically generated during the marriage itself, which increases what falls into the marital property category to begin with. There's also a second factor at play in cases like this. The non-earning or less financially visible spouse's contribution to the marriage is often legally recognized as valuable in its own right. Managing a household, raising children, supporting the other spouse's career and public life. Family courts in many jurisdictions don't just look at whose name is on a paycheck. They look at what each partner contributed to the marriage as a whole. Here's a detail that almost never makes it into the headlines about these cases. Settlements at this scale don't get calculated by guesswork. They get calculated by teams of forensic accountants, specialists whose entire job is tracing exactly how much wealth exists, where it's actually held, and how much of it grew during the marriage versus before it. In cases involving art collections, offshore accounts, or complex business holdings, this process alone can take months or years. Wealthy spouses have, in other documented cases, been found to delay disclosing assets, undervalue holdings, or shift property into trust specifically to keep it out of the marital property calculation. Forensic accountants exist specifically to counter that, to find the full picture, not just the version one spouse wants a court to see. This is exactly why prenuptial agreements have become almost standard practice among the ultra-wealthy today. A prenup is a legal contract, signed before marriage, that defines in advance what counts as separate property versus marital property if the marriage ends. Without one, a spouse in a long marriage involving significant wealth growth is, in many jurisdictions, legally entitled to a substantial share of what was built, not because a judge decided to be generous, but because family law in many places is specifically built around the idea that marriage is an economic partnership, not just a personal one. Here's the reframe that makes this case make sense. A $2.5 billion settlement isn't the law punishing someone for getting divorced. It's the law treating a 21-year marriage as exactly what it legally is in many jurisdictions, a shared economic unit, where both partners generally have a claim to what was built while they were together. The number feels shocking because of the scale, but the underlying legal principle, that wealth built during a marriage is typically shared property, is the exact same principle that applies in a divorce involving a house, a small business, or a retirement account for people who aren't billionaires at all. You don't need billions for this to matter to you. If you're married or planning to be, understanding what counts as marital property versus separate property in your state affects everything from a house you bought together to a business one of you started after the wedding. And prenups aren't just for the ultra-wealthy anymore. Attorneys increasingly recommend them for anyone entering a marriage with significant assets, a business, or children from a previous relationship, not because they expect divorce, but because clarity protects both people if life takes an unexpected turn. If breaking down the actual law behind headlines like this is something you want more of, subscribe, because this channel does exactly that every single week. And if you want to see what happens when a spouse tries to hide assets instead of disclosing them honestly, I covered a case exactly like that. Links right here.